After 100 years of standing tall on the cliffs of West Hill, I no longer exist. I am being replaced by a younger version of myself. The problem was mainly in my feet, dug deep into the earth. They said I could no longer bear the weight of my stories.
The privilege of the floor is the opportunity for any member of the public to address the board for 3 minutes.
A kind neighbor did speak up for me.
The existing foundations of these buildings are in place, and maybe they need a little fixing here and there. But, with a creative touch, you can salvage any wood frame building. We need to get used to the idea of fixing things and reusing them rather than smashing them up and starting over, because that's got a huge carbon footprint. I just can't.
His remarks fell largely on deaf ears. Conventional wisdom states that deep pockets of money are available for building anew. Not so much for propping up the old. Also, I could never be as sustainable as the newer version of me promises to be. What seems to be forgotten is that I had sustained human existence for decades before sustainability was a thing. Countless numbers of individuals passed through my doors. I made a home to all manner of human experience. Births, deaths, high society functions, criminality, heroism, and war. The spirit of all those past lives were atomized and commingled with the debris from my own destruction. What were once walls, windows, even my chimney is now lost as embodied energy. The wood, stone, and steel that went into my construction painstakingly fit together by the hands of men and women. I am thankful they have passed on, so as not to bear witness to my own ending. The same cannot be said for my century-old neighbor, who looked upon my demise with foreboding. I used to enjoy great views from my cliffside. Cornell, on the opposite hill, stood out as a beacon of prosperity for the small town in the valley below. Unfortunately, in this time of pandemic, as the university diminishes, prosperity can be taken away as easily as it was given. On the southernmost hill, I watched as great towers rose up to house Ithaca College's young denizens. The monoliths appeared to strive for the grandeur of the sky. Aspirations of youth, gently rebuked by the soaring birds in the tower's midst. I was also observant of the development that occurred on the valley floor. As is the wont of humanity, there has never been a lack of building in my memory. Young Harold is a project in the city center I had been keeping my eye on. What were once a few historic buildings became a hole in the ground. Then Harold rose up in their place. The tall, gleaming yellow insulation was a reflection of the sun itself, until the gray outer shell encased the luminance. Harold is an example of building up rather than out, the intent being that human density is the savior of a city hollowed out by the decades-long shift of commerce to the fringes of town. I am skeptical that tall apartment buildings are ever a measure of prosperity. In my experience, life is more fully lived close to the ground, where roots are traditionally anchored. Back in my own neighborhood, I harbor no ill feelings for my replacement. The ground has been so built over that hardly a remnant of my past life is evident. The surrounding trees may remember, but they've always maintained a silent vigil. Maybe these new buildings can do something I never could: make money, which is truly the key to longevity. What's more sustainable than that?
This development is occurring in a UNA. That's short for Unique Natural Area, so designated by the Environmental Management Council of the county. This UNA, called Octopus Cliffs, is known for its rock outcroppings. But whether the UNA is truly unique may be of question. Small critters blend into the landscape. Others walk through while on their way to elsewhere. Perhaps the uniqueness is in how the natural area encompasses human habitation throughout its borders. The UNA does not have the protections of a designated park, so the recommendations to tread lightly are just that, recommendations. Which doesn't mean that you're unlikely to find some pretty special things throughout the UNA. The cut of the gorges as they take a steep dive through the cliffs of West Hill, and the varied plant life that clings to the walls, not far above rushing water. All the glorious trees still hold up in less disturbed parts of the UNA. It's not for nothing that the UNA manages as well as it does, so close to human habitation. Still, some development is more egregious than the single homes that preceded it. And even the protection normally offered wild areas to ensure minimal impact of the land. Water. Plants and animals. And the character of the neighborhood falls to the wayside under the auspices of the city planning director, who signs off that the project will have no significant impact on the environment.
The public hearing is now closed.
And the development sails through the local planning board with no dissent, but to advise mitigation to avoid worst harm. The advice is small comfort to the trees which are felled or are destined to be. It appears that the trees are the only ones standing vigil at the profound disturbance by their feet, as if perhaps it's their sacred duty to hold the line on any further encroachment. It was hoped that one tree in the far corner might escape unscathed. It was unique, not only for its towering stature, but the ripples of its bark, the outward face of the tree's personality, and the long branches that took strange angular turns until finally settling on which direction to face. Great blossoms of leaves provided much shade in the heat of the summer. Then the bare branches acted as a windbreak in the winter. There was some hope, since the tree carried the red marks for months, that it may be granted a reprieve. It was an unrealistic hope. All that is left is a stump, revealing the rings of an inner life, and the only monument to its existence There isn't much argument that the loss of a tree is one less resource in a shrinking habitat. Where once nests were easily found, now you may have to look hard to spot one. There was also a time when birds would flock on tree branches in every weather imaginable. Now you're lucky to see a lone mourning dove, the plaintive cry attempting to be heard above the sound of construction. The loss of habitat may also affect some species without the protection of feathers or fur.
Excuse me, do you live here?
Nah, I'm just an Airbnb guest. This is where I get my mail.
So how long have you been staying here?
About 30 years, since 1976. That's when I went full bore sustainable. I turned my back on all of this.
You and the other species are going to have to move out of here soon. Those houses up the hill, they're going to be tearing those down, putting up an apartment building.
What? They're tearing down all these houses? Damn, there goes the neighborhood.
It's been a few centuries since people lived sustainably within the environment of the Ithaca region. 150 years of human expansion utilized much of the natural resources of the area. Until the present day, when the warnings that the drawdown of our natural resources will affect the planet for generations to come.
This all ties into a fundamental Extinction Rebellion principle. We need a regenerative culture to replace the degenerative culture that we're all trapped in. It's up to us to create it, if we can.
These cautions often go unheeded, even in a place like Ithaca. For as long as X's are put on the backs of trees, especially vulnerable to human encroachment, and local government sanctions some measure of environmental degradation as the price of progress, then surely the significance of a small natural area on the edge of town will eventually disappear, and the unique natural area will become unique in name only.
My neighbors have been abandoned for about a year. For me, it's been much longer. I know it's starting to show. My peeling paint, the crawling vegetation, the hanging gutters, the vacant stare of my windows. I don't suffer abandonment easily. I try to be a forward-looking home, but often memories pull me back in time. Inside was a big central room full of joyous noise, with a picture window for the tree-filled landscape. The galley kitchen, sometimes crowded with too many cooks. Not a problem to fit a kid, or two, in the bedrooms. Too often, abandoned apartments have nothing to do with nostalgia, as remnants of hurried lives may be left behind. You hope the tenants got out before the whole place went to hell. Abandonment of a single home isn't good, but abandonment of a whole city street is simply criminal. A wholesale slaughter of wood frame and masonry that may have stood for at least 100 years. The fate of these homes were preordained by their bad luck to be built in College Town. Students come and go, so there is no enduring connection to the place they live. Hard to imagine an owner-occupied neighborhood being treated in such a fashion. Ithaca's college town is a notorious example of the old being forced out for the new. For many decades, the change was incremental. But in the last few years, it's a makeover for the soul of a neighborhood. There really was a time when front porches were the gathering spots. It's hard to strike up a conversation when your neighbor is a glass wall. What, then, is the fate of these poor souls? The plan was for replacement by a so-called innovation district. Multiple 10-story buildings that wish to own the sky, as have other tall buildings in College Town. Well-heeled developers offered the city millions of dollars on condition of approval for their building plans. Fortunately, the local planning board was not so enthusiastic. A whole neighborhood in demise could be worrying, even to houses on the distant hill opposite. The neighborhood in which I was built. This grand home sits on a cliffside. It has been added on to over the decades and has been well kept since the day it was constructed, 150 years ago. A nearby friend uses the big house as a model for what it takes to maintain something you care about.
Does the word sustainable mean anything to you?
Having a sustainable lifestyle, yeah.
Okay. What goes into living sustainably?
Eating healthy, having a good job, sustaining your cash flow, and how much you're working. Yeah, sure.
So what do you think about those houses being torn down that are right across the creek from you?
Well, think about it. If you built that house, you'd probably not, and you were still alive 100 years later, and you probably wouldn't want it to be destroyed. So, well, I think I just don't really care for what they're doing. I personally don't like it.
Most urban buildings would have had a structure that preceded it, and likely another structure underneath that. Humans engage in an endless cycle of building, tearing down, and rebuilding, as if our natural resources exist to satisfy this uniquely human appetite. If only the words of sustainable living would match their actions. Then, perhaps, humans would abandon the idea of abandonment.
In the unique natural area, we have been thinking about climate change for some time now. Of course, it's the climate of development that concerns us most. But there is a greater change blowing in the air. A whiff from the distant thermals tells us of terrible fires thousands of miles away. It's been a dry summer around here for many years, but nothing compared to what our long-distance brethren are going through. Typically, summer in the natural area is a time to kick back a bit and bathe in the light. Foraging is easy, especially by the fence of a natural area garden. Smaller creatures use the long days to catch up on their food stores. The gorges run pretty low in the summer, and at times the waterfalls in the natural area dry up. The tap then gets turned off for the large bodies of water dependent on the feeder streams. But living with less is just nature's timeless means of adaptation. As the music calls to reawaken the earth, spring is truly when a natural area blossoms. Small hands sprout from thousands of branches, waving and whispering on the currents of wind. The leaves also provide a curtain for the natural area, which has been laid bare all winter long. Spring flowers thrive in both sun and shade. Some planted every year by human hands. Others pop up on their own year after year. Such is the beauty of flowering trees that adorn the natural area, often for only short periods of time. A reminder that some of the most beautiful things in life are short-lived and will pass quickly if not recognized in the moment. One indication of climate change is the boom and bust cycle of nature. Spring rains have been a constant force of nature since forever, but recently the gorges seem to explode, then die back quickly. When it does pour, everything caught up in the current courses through the edge of town, until it reaches the great lake of our region, which, of course, supports all manner of life. The natural area plays no small part in contributing to this cycle of regeneration. Winter and early spring are sometimes indistinguishable in the natural area. A surprise snowfall can occur at any time. The dead of winter is truly a misnomer, because in truth there is very little death in wintertime, only slumber with blankets to cover many limbs. The dead of winter refers to the quiet of winter, which so many expect, but has been replaced by a rattle and hum in the natural area, from sunrise to sunset. A long winter freeze of our gorges is not as common as it used to be. A continual state of freezing and thawing is more the norm, which does afford the ice some shining in all its crystalline beauty. It also brings out the inquisitive neighbor whose fascination with ice is completely understandable. Breaking up ice is a human endeavor for the ages. Many people appreciate the foliage in the fall for the many colors. It's time to shine, and it's been that way since perpetuity. In the fall of 2019, the natural area took on some losses. 3 of the long-standing dwellings were removed. It was not a spectacular sight to see them go, piece by piece. It was more gruesome than can be imagined. The mature trees attempted to shield the younger ones, but really, there was no hiding the destruction. To be left as nothing but crumbs on the earth. It's not that the natural area has no experience with death. The lovely foliage is short-lived as the leaves die off and ceremoniously are released from the trees. Some leaves become stacked on the wall of the gorges, waiting for the rushing water ride down to the sea. This is a cycle of life nature is used to. Each morning, trees extend fealty to the sun, and in return glow in the warmth. And by evening, the natural area is ready for the great show of colors put on by the sky. We have to believe that what stayed constant from the beginning of time cannot be swayed by human-born forces. After all, the natural area has a long history of coexistence, which, I fear, may be our undoing.
Ithaca's building boom has given the word sustainable new currency. A local Green New Deal, green building codes, and even a dedicated sustainable employee and tax credits have institutionalized the drive to be at peace with the planet. You don't have to go far back in history to see the roots of a sustainable Ithaca. Residents lived close to the center of town in houses built to last. Basic needs were met by stores that were fixtures of downtown and were around for generations. Until they weren't. When humans without local ties remade the outskirts of town into giant parking lots for the thousands of cars that turned people away from the heart of their community. There was some uproar when the big boxes encroached on sensitive wetlands or impeded the viewshed of a nearby state park. But the stores were hardly stopped dead in their tracks. Perhaps it's useful to consider some community icons whose practice of sustainability predates the recent construction boom. In the heart of downtown, So Green works with the reuse of fabric, as elemental a human need that you can find. Owner Wendy Skinner points out that humans throw out a collective 21 billion pounds of clothing every year. So Green does some small part to minimize the waste by collecting fabric discards and returning them for sale. Most sustainable businesses have a community educational component. Sewing gets right to the nub of basic skills everyone should have in their back pocket. Teach a kid to sew, and they are on a sustainable path for life. Getting around with minimal impact on the environment is basic to sustainable living. Ithaca has a great biking corridor that runs through the western edge of town. But most city streets don't accommodate biking. The designated bike lanes are only a handlebar's length away from traffic. Still, there are many bikers in the area who made good use of a workshop dedicated to repair and education. For about 20 hours per week, staff were on hand to help patrons fix their own bikes. No computer diagnostics needed, just the desire to learn the basic technology of the bike and an hour or two to solve a problem. If you were looking to buy a used bike, cheap and in good shape, there were plenty available. It's a minor sustainable miracle that a shop like this could exist for 30 years. But unfortunately, Ribs closed their doors in the spring of 2020. As of this filming, they were looking for a new place to set up shop. Drop them a line if you can be helpful. The last stop on our sustainable tour is a small business near and dear to my heart. Suppose someone went through all my rooms and removed great old doors, doorknobs, light globes, and windows. I would give a foundation stone if someone plucked one of my sweet light switches and made it their own. Anything that could live on past my demise would be wonderful. Repairing what's old rather than discarding it certainly gets to the heart of sustainability. When furniture gets repaired, it becomes an old friend, much less likely to be tossed in a capricious fashion. A common trait to the many small sustainable organizations throughout the Ithaca area is their affordability. Local leaders point to Ithaca's investment in energy-efficient affordable housing as a countermeasure to the unaffordable housing made most visible. The high cost of living in the apartments angers some locals who see inequity in the changing face of their community.
These motherfuckers are destroying the whole character of Ithaca. Large developers who are building monstrosities like these for the 1%. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of Ithacans that have no place to live, and this is not going to provide them living space, only to the 1%.
As the gap grows ever wider between those who live close to the ground and those burrowed high in the sky, it begs the question whether Ithaca's future can be all but a green dream for those who can afford to take part. Perhaps if the city supported more of the roots of sustainability, small footprints in which everyone can walk, then a more equitable future may be assured. It's no great surprise that the excavator is at war with nature. When your sole purpose in life is extraction, you go about it with a single-minded purpose. The UNA, on the other hand, takes the hits, leaves considerable scars, but is rarely overcome. Perhaps that's why excavators turn most viciously on human creations. They know their destruction is complete. Personally, I prefer the humans that show a penchant for creation. Although there's no denying their reliance on natural resources in the process. Concrete, a resource ground up and recombined, is depended upon to be strong enough to host a building through the end of time. Hardly an expectation too extreme for an element born of nature. I remember what it's like to have hands shape the first concrete of my foundation. It's a human touch that lays an imprint for all the building ahead. Square-edged stonework has been the heart of good construction since the dawn of civilization. Unfortunately, it's usually buried too deep in the dirt to garner much appreciation. These guys will work from sunup to sundown, creating a structure they will never occupy. Once their part of the building is complete, they will move on, and another crew will commence work. I guess it's the nature of building large boxes that it takes many specialties. As a stationary life form, it is with some envy that the trees watch these guys work. Twisting, turning, and lifting 100 times a day would be an unimaginable experience for those who gently sway. But building too close to overhanging branches can be a fraught experience in its own right, as young leaves can't help but to see inside. Once brethren, trees are now cut up with their pieces bracketed to each other at odd angles. To see their integrity so diminished is a bitter pill to swallow, as is the slicing and dicing of the best part of a tree, only to end up as a discard, jumbled together with the other cast-offs from the building trades, destined to be dumped again in piles much greater still, until a small mountain of resources, natural and unnatural alike, are created in unseen places. The UNA is certainly not affronted by all excavation. Digging down 2 to 3 feet with a small hand tool to turn the soil is no comparison to the rapacious appetite of the excavator. This garden conforms to the surrounding trees, yet lets in enough sun to allow for prodigious growth. Indeed, seeing the early plants of spring through the succulents of summer and the hardy squash of late fall is a reminder of the ever-changing bounty that the UNA offers. On occasion, nature will offer a fearsome blast that puts a hold on the excavation. But never for long. It's an interminable conflict for which the UNA must remain ever vigilant. A sacred duty, you may call it. The belief of never being overcome in the face of long odds that say otherwise. The neighborhood across the inlet has been feeling a little diminished lately. While not exactly in the shadows, many felt the new oversized neighbor was cutting into their afternoon light.
Isn't this why we have height restrictions? To keep any one building from getting too big for themselves?
I'd like to know why we have rules if no one has to follow them. Are the lawyers on this? Lawyers!
Oh, sorry. I was reviewing some building violations.
It's just small potatoes. Nothing to worry about. Since the new building came in, everyone is getting a closer look. So, what was the question?
How did this building get here?
Well, height restrictions changed since we rezoned a couple years back. It's also an affordable housing thing. Developers can't make a profit by building small.
Well, on the bright side, if he ever blows over, we will have a great neighborhood checkerboard.
Could laugh at what's next on the agenda. The loss of Weitzman.
Oh God, please don't remind me.
That was a business with heart. As good-spirited as they come, and a reminder of what hard work means for an old industrial neighborhood like ours.
I even got used to all the pounding, although the metal buildings rattled like teacups.
Doesn't anyone think it's strange that Whiteman is going out right as this new building is coming in?
No, I'm not one to trade in conspiracies, but if it walks like a duck...
Look, we've got 10 minutes left on this free call, and we have to decide on a going away present. How about $50 each?
Now, I happen to know they've been looking to get another crane for their new operation. The funds would go a long way to helping them with a deposit.
Can't argue with money well spent, I guess. Okay, put me down for 40.
I could maybe do the suggested 50.
Yeah, I could kick in too. I got you covered.
All right, look, 75, that's kind of my limit.
Oh, nice.
You're killing
It's all
me.
for a good cause. All for a good cause.
It is a good cause, but I just had to put in new HVAC. I'm really strapped for funds right now. We're going to miss him.
We will. I set my clocks to that pounding, but...
What are you gonna do?
The loss of Weitzman is a loss of neighborhood identity, and many feared the face of the new building was all they had to look forward to. Not unlike the neighborhood in which I was built, this building invaded our shores and had planted itself to stay. It's intended to be affordable, which is a good thing, I guess, coming from a house that never knew anything but affordable. I watched with envy as they wrapped the building foundation in layers of insulation. Made me think about the threadbare treatment my own foundation got. But that was 100 years ago. Who knew? I harbor no regrets, because I gave my life for this building, so I can only wish it the best going forward. Although I was completely torn asunder, my significant pieces dumped, leaving only the dust to ascend skyward. Much more of me became fine fragments, ground into this great earth, to support what follows, as we all must do at some time. It's really how we sustain ourselves. And that's not a bad thing to be remembered for.
What's up with that?
Yeah.
Do you think they should be torn down, or do you think they should be fixed up?
Well, if you look at the foundation, they probably ought to be condemned. But, so they really don't have a choice but to tear them down. Had they have fixed them and done what they were supposed to,
Over the year.
they wouldn't have to be torn down if they would have done their job.
They're beautiful, and I think that they're a very unique part of Ithaca. I think trying to maintain the structures as much as we can while renovating them to be sustainable might be the best option.
These houses have been here as long as I've been going to this school, which is about 6 years, I think. And they've always seemed pretty run down and not really super used. And it would be a little bit out of place to have some nice new shiny apartments, but I think it would be nice to see some houses here being lived in.
Yeah, I'm gonna really miss these houses.
I would definitely miss these houses.
This is the first I'm hearing about this. I'm really mad about that.
That's kind of not rad, in my opinion.
That's not cool, I guess. I don't know. It seems like people need the space.
It was perhaps inevitable that the city would want, or Ithaca Neighborhood Housing would want to make something that works for more people. I do believe Ithaca Neighborhood Housing is doing as good a job as they can to put up attractive, affordable housing. So, of course, I'm nostalgic for the loss of that little house. But on the other hand, I think this is probably going to be a good project for the city.
It's kind of, it's definitely heartbreaking. There was a lot of like peace that I had there at that house. And I had a kind of like separate little room that was my own on the back of the house in this like little porch area place. It was like a windowed in porch, so it was insulated and stuff, but the views out over the inlet were just magnificent, especially at night. You could just see all the lights of the city twinkling. I did sometimes wonder about the structural stability of the building, because when heavy vehicles would roll by, sometimes the whole building would shake and I'd worry about it. And the whole building was definitely kind of sagging away from the central chimney. The building had like all the chimneys were clustered in the center, so there's a fireplace there, of course not functional. And all the floors were kind of sloping away from it in every direction. So I worried about that some. So I don't really know whether the building was structurally stable or not. I'm sure they'll build something nice. I have a decent amount of respect for what INHS builds in this town. I've seen other cities that have some sort of public housing agency, and they build things at a much lower quality level. And they have often like very little eye towards architecture or blending in with the surrounding neighborhood. INHS does a fairly decent job of that.
So your question is, what is the significance of these houses and what is the significance of them being torn down? The first part of that, my answer would be the significance was who lived there and the neighborhood that existed as a result of who lived in those houses. And I will say that many of us who lived in these houses all had different needs, and all of us sort of shared and exchanged gifts to address our different needs. And that's a beautiful thing in a neighborhood, and it usually takes a little time to develop the trust and to learn about each other and see what we needed. And I could go on about the beautiful people and the beautiful ways we exchanged our gifts. But that's the first thing that's sad about, or meaningful about the houses, and sad about that people were forced to leave. The second thing is that those buildings were made with beautiful quality material, and the wooden floors, the beautiful windows, the stone fireplace, and no doubt there were a lot of repairs needed, but when you have such a beautiful old building, I hope you compute and calculate the cost of replacing that beautiful material. It doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from the earth. And now with our great raising consciousness about green material and green this and that, they're saying actually that needs to be computed in your spreadsheet of cost analysis. So I'm sad about the house itself and the material that went into it, and maybe about just the culture. I'm sad. I like to not easily accept the culture that puts profits over people and profits over the environment.
My name is David Weinstein. I'm a longtime member of the Unique Natural Areas Committee of the Environmental Management Council, the county's Environmental Management Council. This committee advises the legislature on things involving the resources, the environmental resources of our county. So the unique natural areas that have been designated, there's 195 of them in this county, and they've been mapped. And the whole idea behind this, they carry no legal status per se, but they carry a warning flag that if there's a project that is being proposed that is going to be in any part of a unique natural area, it's a warning to say, look closely, see if there's any damage that's going to occur to those resources, and are there ways of minimizing the damage that might really compromise the resources of that unique natural area. You could get a sense that this is a natural area in the midst of all of this development, all this density. You can come here, you can enjoy a stream going over waterfalls, and these trees, while they're not, most of them are not native here, they still provide a nice sense of a real environment that where nature is still existing within the context of this dense development here.
Historic Ithaca has got a long-standing role in the community. We've been here for 52 years, and we started with the urban renewal idea that, wipe it out and put something better. And the activists, it was really a grassroots kind of movement. And as our movements grew, we still had, there was a lot of issues going on, but the last 10 years, I would say, there's been a huge boom in development, as you said, and preservation, I think, is having some issues. We've had a lot of issues with not getting things landmarked. The government is really pro-development, it seems to us. We'd like to say that there's some good mitigation happening, but so far not really. There are properties that will be gone forever because folks believe that it should be more dense, especially in the college town and downtown areas where they've what they call upzone, and preservation almost doesn't have a role in some ways. Sadly, I can say that I do think the Commons is a great project. It's been heavily touted all over the country for years and years, as some of the other ones in Burlington, Vermont, which we've studied. That's a great adaptive reuse project. But as we go forward and we think things like Herald Square, which I'm not saying it's a bad building, it's so different than what we have preservation-wise and building-wise and size-wise and scale-wise. So now we're talking about more dense areas of the city. And I think it's incumbent upon us to kind of, as a preservation organization and with our colleagues and friends, is to talk more about how preservation is still beneficial to a community and can coexist with development as well. It can.
Everyone kind of has in their own mind what makes Ithaca, but it is one of those things that when you do see development and projects, you want to make sure that's something that will be a net positive for the community, and that's why there is such a long and rather complex approvals process from reviewing a project for all sorts of impacts, whether it be utilities, especially as we're increasingly concerned about sustainability. Whether it be impacts on traffic, noise, potential odors that can be created if it's an industrial facility, as well as aesthetic and historical resource impacts. Mm-hmm. So the goal is to try and you can't stop the community from changing. That's, you can't lock it in amber. People are always going to come and go. And they're always going to have their own ideas for what they want to do to their homes and their businesses and the buildings they own. You just, and I say you as sort of like the royal you as in use in the community, just want to try and make it something that's a net positive for the community as it continues to change and will continue to change.
There's nothing that we do that's not fostering sustainability from looking at just like taking bikes out of the waste stream to encouraging people to ride bikes.
And encouraging people to get their own skill sets so that they can maintain their bikes and have them less likely to become garbage.
Yeah.
Need to be replaced.
And also the like economic sustainability and agency for folks where it's like encouraging people to not go and buy things at Walmart, not go and spend money in ways that leaves the community.
At the very least, everything that we do, like every design we create, is with a mind towards sustainability, whether it be ecological sustainability, social sustainability, or financial sustainability. Like these are our primary goals, and we do a pretty good job. I mean, we like at 4 years now. Like this has been we're doing it. It's not always easy.
The program is a reuse program. It's a landfill diversion program. We invite people to donate, to give to us sewing fabrics, yarn, sewing tools, anything that has to do with sewing or needlecraft, instead of throwing it in the dumpster. And it's turned out to be something that people have really wanted because they didn't know what to do with these materials. Sometimes it's older people who are downsizing, or it could be women who aren't sewing anymore for one reason or another, or it's their heirs, and more often than not, it's their heirs who are going through grandma's or mom's sewing room and culling through all of that stuff and bringing it to us, and then we do our best to make it look beautiful. So our motto is we make reuse beautiful. And this was something that I learned from going to a whole lot of meetings, that probably the most successful reuse stores are ones that make the product competitive, make the product competitive with new product. I think that Ithaca needs to be careful about what comes next. I think that we need to be aware that we could lose our character if we continue to destroy or blot out with larger structures some of the more beautiful pieces of architecture and architectural heritage that we have. And I think it's time right now, this is 2020, I confess I haven't been involved in speaking up about any of these developments, but I think I'm going to start because it's time for us to really think about this and say, okay, maybe we have to reconsider the height limits, maybe we have to reconsider the design factors, the cladding, the colors, to make sure that what we're doing to our downtown area isn't turning it into a sort of cookie cutter, bland environment, as opposed to an interesting environment that has history right in front of you, that has architectural heritage right in front of you.